So let's begin to look at in the next episode of avoiding unnecessary mistakes, how it may be possible that are we culturally and socially taught to see isolation as a bad thing, as a crisis? Where did this question even come from? Let's take a look at what society tends to do. So, society allows what culture cultivates and influences for families to teach and share what you will ultimately know and do. And one of the things that Alfred Adler, a psychologist, loved to do as a either a student of Freud or an associate of Freud is he began to look at things from the culturalist perspective as uh, a psychologist who tried to help a person understand where they might have been misguided, where they might have had or made their mistakes because of having been misguided. And one of my favorite influencers, if you will, or psychologists is also Erik Erickson. So here we see here Erik Erickson's psychosocial stages of development. Here you have the stages infancy, 0 to 1 years of age, early childhood from 1 to 3 years of age, play age from 3 years to 6 years of age, school age from 7 years to 11 years, adolescence or what I call teenage years from 12 years of age to 18, early adulthood from 19 years of age to 29 years of age, middle age from 30 years of age to 64 years, and that's a large range of years, and old age from 65 years of age to onward. And there's a basic conflict that Erik Erickson opines or postulates or states that humans will have to go through, if you will. Trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus confusion or role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. Okay. And so if you want to pause and look at the virtues that these conflicts, if you make it out of and you're psychologically and physiologically developed in these stages and develop the tools and the skills that you need to get so that you can develop out of these stages and get to a stage of continuity. And what that description means, if you have your basic needs met or develop a sense of independence in many tasks and take on initiatives for some activities or develop self-confidence and abilities, things like that, please feel free to look into those. But I wanted to reimagine Eric's psychosocial stages. So here, I developed another chart here, which kind of breaks it down where you can see it from a different perspective. So you got the age of the stages of infancy, early childhood, play age, school age in this section kind of over here, right? And you begin to see the age ranges. And so you have the conflict. And what I did was I separated it and color coded it where you see the conflict, the basic conflict of trust, autonomy, initiative, industry, identity, intimacy, generativity, and integrity as that which is good, right? But then you have the bad conflict. And of course, that which is good or bad is rather subjective because what is good or bad can depend on who we're asking. You know, what may be good for one may be bad for another, and vice versa. But as it relates to this stage, what is bad? Mistrust, shame and doubt, guilt, inferiority complex, role confusion, isolation, stagnation, and despair. Okay. And those things can be seen as bad. So I decided to, in this psychosocial stage, actually introduce Piaget's theory of cognitive development, right? You have the sensory motor. We sense things and we do things when we're first born at from 0 to about 3 years of age. And then you've got pre-operational from about 3 to 6. And then at 7 years of age to 11, we get concrete operational. That is either this or that. You can see that right here in this stage at the school age, concrete, operational. It's either this or that. And then you get to the teenage years and beyond, and it becomes formal, operational, more abstract, more gray area, more context, right? But then if you begin to look at Erik Erickson's psychosocial stages, it looks as though the entire thing is put in a concrete operational thing of either this or that, that it's either trust or mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, integrity versus despair. The whole thing seems concrete. And at the infancy and early childhood and a play age stage and the school age, that pretty much makes sense. But when you get to identity and role confusion, you actually start to get more abstract, more context, right? And especially at intimacy or isolation. So let's get to the main question that was posed in here. Does society and culture actually cultivate seeing isolation as a bad conflict or a bad thing, right? Let's look at the early adulthood, right? 19 years of age to 29 years of age. Let's look at that. Intimacy versus isolation, right? You want to establish intimacy and then look at establishing relationships with others, right? And so that's the conflict. And so when we begin to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I did introduce that in this reimagined, if you will, or reframed Erik Erickson's psychosocial stages of development as a constructivist, because I believe that theories are falsifiable, because as you begin to add things to it, or as we begin to look at human growth and development, it is multi-dimensional, plastic, if you will, looking at various theories, if you will. So let's go ahead and look at it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow is a psychologist who studied positive human qualities in the lives of exemplary people. And in 1954, he created the hierarchy of human needs and expressed that his theories in his book, Motivation and Personality. And so the goal is to get to self-actualization, a person's motivation to reach his or her full potential. And as shown here in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a person's basic needs must be met before self-actualization can be achieved, right? So let's concentrate. If you want to take a pause to look at each of these stages, we can do that. But I kind of want to focus on the stages of your safety needs, right? Security of your body, like any pyramid, we start at the bottom, right? The security of the body, security of employment, resources, morality, and the family. Let's look at the family. That's very important for establishing the need to feel secure. All humans have the need to feel secure and the need to belong, right? That's the next stage, love and belonging, the family. That's what you see in both of these needs, the family. So let's continue with this. Early adulthood, 19 to 29 years of age. Intimacy and isolation. Intimacy and isolation. The virtue, love, right? We just talked about that. You know, that your physiological needs and your safety needs, love and belonging, esteem needs, the love and belonging is what we're focusing on. Establishing intimacy and relationships with others. But let's look at the definition of isolation, right? So isolation is a noun. It's defined as the process or fact of isolating or being isolated. The isolation of older people as an example. So question, who taught you that isolation was a bad thing, right? We as humans are the collections of our needs, experiences, motivations, habits, and education. Our needs, experiences, motivations, habits, and education. So with my clients, I like to look at things in terms of the experience with the word isolation versus the definition that has no emotional label. In other words, how to feel. You see it's misspelled, but how to feel or how it feels in the definition of the word. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to back up and I am going to let's put that where it's spelled correctly. I want to go on ahead and do that. That's important, right? Good. Here we go. Let's go on ahead and continue. How to feel versus how it feels in the definition of the word, right? For example, shame. It's a noun. It's defined as a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. What is that emotional label in the definition? Painful. It lets you know in the definition how that feeling, that word can make you feel, right? Can make you feel. So let's look at the definition of isolation, the process or fact of isolating or being isolated. Do you see an emotional label? I would argue no, right? So let's push on. Let's look at, again, family, love and belonging, family for your safety needs, right? When men, women, family, and friends walk away, remember I said all humans have two primal needs, the need to feel secure and the need to feel in control, right? And when you don't feel secure because your family doesn't make you feel secure, when you don't feel in control because your family doesn't show you that that you are loved and that you belong, what could you feel? You could feel isolated, right? But what can that encourage you to do? That can encourage you to try to establish intimacy or relationships with others in search for love, right? But if we are taught not to see isolation as a bad thing, obviously you saw the color change, but to see it as a good thing. Why can isolation be a good thing? Because if you look at it, let's look at the age range. Early adulthood, 19 to 29 years of age. The prefrontal cortex in the brain develops fully at age 25. At age 25, that's when it fully develops. That's halfway between the age range of 19 to 29 years of age, right? Then if you're looking at the virtue of love, let's look at it in the Greek. It's philautia, right? People talk about the 5 love languages: physical touch, acts of service, words of affirmation, gifts, and quality time. But we don't look at the 7 types of love in the Greek, right? That's something to look at. And one of those things is philautia. Philautia means self-love. So as you can see, my description changed. If you need to pause it and go back and look at it, right? Establish intimacy into me. See, you need to look into you and have a relationship with yourself first before seeking meaningful relationships with others. There are 4 relationship types: a targeted relationship, a tentative relationship, transactional relationship, and trusted. But in order to learn those things and even learn of the self, what you haven't been taught, what you have been taught, what you need to be taught, you need isolation to study more and to allow your brain to fully develop. Even if we look along the chart in Erik Erickson's psychosocial stages, look at middle age, 30. Now, for women, it may be different because you have a different biological clock. But if you look at it for a male or a man, right, let's look at it, 30 to 64 years of age, generativity versus stagnation. You're in the formal operational. You're able to understand more abstract now. You've come from early adulthood where you've given yourself the time to fully evolve and your brain to fully develop and to study more. Now you're able to have the virtue of care. You're able to contribute to society and be part of a family. But I find it troubling that you're trying to establish relationships with others before you learn and give yourself grace. What's the rush? And I think that Erik Erickson did this assuming positive intentions, but that's where theories can become falsifiable when introducing new ways of looking at things and even seeing how we may be gassed up by society and by culture to create family before we're even ready. And we're taught to see isolation as a bad thing. Where could that perhaps come from? Where could that come from? Again, focusing on, the prefrontal cortex in the brain fully developing at 25 years of age, and the need to establish intimacy and a relationship with the self, right? Where can that come from? Let's start at early childhood. Oh, here we go. Early childhood, from 1 to 3 years of age. It is said that the first 5 years, 5 to 7 years, are extremely critical. And you have Erik Erickson along with the other developmental theories to look at. But let's look at this, right? Autonomy, which is a great thing. What do you do? Develop a sense of independence in many tasks. I would argue that's the first attempt that a human being is trying to isolate themselves from their parents. But if the parents, no shame, no judgment, I promise, no shame, no judgment, due to the graphic nature of what you may be about to hear, trigger warning, listener discretion is advised. So embrace yourself, because I could say something that is triggering, but it needs to be said. When the parents have not had the inner childhood issues addressed, and there is discontinuity, in other words, there is a psychological stop because of something that wasn't addressed, creating a void, a parent who is in shame and doubt, you weren't able to take the initiative, so you have guilt. You have an inferiority complex. You are confused in your roles. You are taught to see isolation as a bad thing, looking to establish intimacy and relationships with others before the self. This is all because of trauma you did not ask for. You didn't ask you for this. Give yourself grace. It's not your fault. It's what you were taught. It harms the will to develop a sense of independence in many tasks. You see what I'm saying? You have guilt for when you've tried to do things and you lived in a perfectionist household and you were never allowed the safe space to make necessary mistakes. You made a lot of unnecessary mistakes. You have an inferiority complex and you weren't allowed to be industrious and develop self-confidence in your abilities when competent. You developed a sense of inferiority, And so what does that do? Right? It affects the child. Right? Let's look at the so-called terrible twos and the importance of encouraging independence and strategic isolation. This is on the healthline.com website. It was written by Donna Cristano on February 25th, 2019, but it was medically reviewed by Dr. Karen Gill, right? Do all children go through it? Whether it comes at 18 months or 3 years of age, most kids, especially in the Western world, where there are certain societal expectations for children's behavior, sidebar, those expectations could be unrealistic. These children will display some of the signs of terrible twos. Kids at this age are developing an independence and a sense of self, and it's reasonable to assume that their views and expectations won't match up with yours. Still, some children will breeze through terrible twos with less tantrums than others. This is especially the case if they have advanced language skills. Harvard Brain Science. Read to your child. Read a lot of books. Have conversations with them. Why do we want to have conversations with them? Because the myelination that needs to occur in the brain that gives the children a lot of words, because exposure comes before comprehension. Exposure comes before comprehension. But if they haven't been exposed to the language they need to learn, and if you don't understand child development and you wait till you think that they can understand, it may be a little too late, right? If they have the advanced skills which help them express themselves more clearly and cut down on frustration, parents and caregivers can also help by avoiding some common meltdown triggers. For example, keeping a child up past their normal bedtime or trying to run errands with a hungry child can trigger mood swings or tantrums, right? So strategic isolation is necessary. Let's look at Yuri Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, the microsystem, the family, the school, the health services, right? The peers, the religious organizations and student services and neighborhood, all of that stuff in the microsystem helps a child understand the complex, helps a child to understand at an early age that they need to be allowed to isolate themselves so they can calm down and cool down. That stuff really matters at the early age. If you allow your child to walk away, you have to be a secure parent to allow your child to walk away. Sometimes when you're in the middle of talking and trying to correct them or redirect them, I don't like those words, correction and redirection. I like encouragement, re-encouragement, encouragement, re-encouragement, encouragement, re-encouragement. Encouragement, re-encouragement, encouragement, re-encouragement, not redirection. Direction. See, you have to listen to how words sound and don't listen with educated ears. Don't listen with adult ears. Listen with children ears, child language. What is redirection? It sounds rather punitive. It sounds too hard. But encouragement sounds wonderful. Repetition sounds wonderful. When a child says, again, again, that's repetition. Why? Because they're curious. You want to keep that curiosity open, right? But sometimes when you overload that child with a lot of information, all humans have a need to feel secure and feel in control. Sometimes that child may walk away. When that child walks away, let's encourage that. When that child walks away, let's encourage that. Why do we want to encourage that? Because that's their attempt of getting away from you, because sometimes you could do too much, getting away from you and recollecting their thoughts, recollecting their feelings, coming to center, getting back to a position where they are in control of their reactions. I don't want a child to be in control of their emotions. They need to have their emotions, but they need to control their reactions. Sometimes they need to separate from you and develop an independence or a sense of independence in many tasks. And one of those things is reaction control. Reaction control. They need to have the autonomy and the safe space and take the initiative and be industrious in establishing security of the mind, security of the body, right? And that's why you see these highlighted in blue, because if they are shamed out of the developing the independence and the task of being into me, see, children are naturally born selfish. Children are naturally born needy. Children are not born to be patient right away. They develop patience over time. They develop it over time, and they need that isolation. So we cannot see isolation as a bad conflict. We must re-encourage and reframe ourselves to see isolation as a good thing. Why? Because if you're trying to establish relationships in an early stage, thinking about others before you think about yourself, and you mess that up, and you get divorced, and your children leave you and don't want to talk to you anymore, aren't you back to being isolated? Now, is that kind of isolation a good thing or a bad thing? I would argue it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. Now, that is a bad thing. That's why I say the best criminal justice is early childhood education. The best discipline is early childhood education. The best of everything is early childhood education. Early childhood education. Society allows, what culture cultivates influences for the family to teach and share what you will ultimately know and do. Let's not allow society and certain societal theories, although done with good intentions, let's assume positive intention, right? Let's not allow society and culture to cultivate us seeing isolation as a bad thing. This is Instructor Mike. You've been trained. Go on ahead and like, comment, and share, and join us for the next episode on avoiding unnecessary mistakes.